Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel, Peterisms, where I tell stories of my life and just little things that I've learned as I have grown into the person that I am today. And usually on Fridays, I do my Dear Peter videos, but I haven't done them for the last couple weeks because something has always come up on those days that I wanted to do a video about. Such is the case today. So I'm gonna talk about something different because I need to do this for me today. Kind of an interesting thing happened to me. A friend of mine that's also in recovery, who is also in Al-Anon, which is a 12-step program for friends and family members of alcoholics and addicts, reached out to me and asked me if I would go and share my story and also just say some things about toxic relationships or whatever at an open Al-Anon meeting. And an open Al-Anon meeting, an open meeting is for anybody that wants to come. You don't have to identify with Al-Anon or anything like that. And so it's tonight that I have to go speak. Well, you guys know I have social anxiety. It's like supposedly a very small meeting, like 10 people, but I get more nervous speaking to 10 people than I do like 100 or 1,000. I really struggle with it. And so I drove around for a long time last night, like you guys know I do in my vlog, and I was thinking a lot about it, and I've been thinking a lot about today, like what I wanted to talk about. And I mean, she said to me that the reason she thought of me actually, are you ready? This is kind of funny. This is somebody I've known in recovery for a long time. Was that she was watching my video that I was talking about Trisha Paytas and Jason Nash in there, and I was talking about marriage counseling and things, and she said I would really, love to hear you share your story about marriage counseling and how it's helped you as a person in recovery and things like that. So I was kind of like jotting down some notes today and last night and stuff and thinking about, like I got home and I like wrote down a bunch on the Post-it note of things I wanted to say. And the very first time that I ever spoke and I shared my story in a 12-step meeting is interesting. I bawled my eyes out, and I had quotes, and I had the whole thing like outlined. I had like typed it up and outlined it. And I just don't do that anymore, And I don't know, maybe YouTube has made that easier for me, that whenever I do any kind of like public speaking, which this isn't even really, I wouldn't consider public speaking, I just go and I just tell my story and I share whatever's like on my mind that day. And I was thinking about the fact of like, I wanted to talk about toxic relationships and how I caused toxic relationships when I was using. But I was really thinking a lot about how there have been a lot of times in my life that I myself have gone to Al-Anon meetings and gotten a lot out of a 12-step program for friends and family members. And it really comes from the point of growing up with my mother being an alcoholic. And it's interesting because I can already see myself at this meeting tonight. I'm going to be very emotional. I don't know why, but I started making YouTube videos regularly 2 years ago in May on BookTube. It hasn't even been 2 years since I've been on my Peter Monn main channel yet that I've been making videos. That's September 1st will be 2 years. And I don't think the things that I share on video I could have shared 10 years ago when my mom was still alive. When I worked in treatment programs, I very openly shared my story of growing up in an alcoholic home and how that affected me. I talked about secrets making us sick and things like that, and about making amends and family reunification and all of that kind of stuff. But when I would talk to my mom, my mother also being in sobriety, she was a very, very private person, and she would say, I just don't want people to know, blah, blah, blah. There's a stigma attached to being in sobriety. There's a stigma attached to women in sobriety, school teachers, because she was a school teacher at one point, and all this kind of stuff. She just didn't want people to know. And I'd say, okay, Mom, when you were parking your car in the front yard, did you think people didn't know that you might have a drinking problem? So, like for her, but that's not my place to, tell her anonymity. But towards the end, we had a lot of conversations about it, and I think like today, she would say things to me like, you can tell your story if you want, but this is my story, and unless you're really helping people, be careful what pieces of my story you tell. And she was very, very like, that was important to her, right? And so it was long after my mom was gone that I felt like I will tell her story, but only if there are bits and pieces of, there's some real pain there of having grown up with an alcoholic parent that I will never share on video. It's not fair to her. It's her story. It's not mine. It's my story of what I went through. My mom was a very sick woman in her own addiction that tried really hard to be the best mom that she could possibly be, and I think there are a lot of parents out there that do the same thing. It's just their addiction keeps them from that. So the stories that I tell specifically about my mom is very deliberate. Somebody asked me the other night, last night, they said, what was your favorite video? What was your proudest video you've ever made on any of your channels? And I said, well, me reading The Lonely Doll on BookTube is one of my favorites. But I said either my video about bullying on my main channel or my video called Dear Joey Graceffa, because I talk about having an alcoholic parent in there. And we don't talk about it, you know? We protect our families. We maybe talk to a friend or not, you know? But we don't talk about the secrets that go on and what we grow up in and the fear that we grow up in and the fear of not knowing what... If I could define my childhood as being the child of an alcoholic, I could define it to one sentence. This is what I would say. I never knew what I was going to be walking into or waking up to on a daily basis. I never knew. It was never consistent. You know, most children have some kind of consistency in their life. For me, it wasn't. I didn't know if I was going to wake up to pancakes and bacon and it was going to be that mom, or if I was going to wake up to a mom that didn't roll out of bed until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, hungover. I didn't know if she was going to be drunk by 5 o'clock in the evening. I didn't know what mom I was going to have on a daily basis. That fear that I grew up with is terrifying. The reason this is important, and the reason that I was thinking about it today and going to speak to people, and I have forgiven my mom to her face. And, you know, my mother and I have had many conversations about her being an alcoholic and my being an alcoholic and an addict and things like that. And our relationship was repaired, and I wish for everybody out there to have the relationship that my mom and I had before she passed away for those last 10, 12 years. She would have been sober this last June. She would have been sober, you know, well, 13 years, the year that she died, but she would have been sober 23 years. We were sober the same amount of years. She got sober 6 months after I did. And I'm not somebody that will tell you that my mom was my best friend. She wasn't. My mom getting sober allowed her to be a mother. It allowed her to have a relationship with her adult son. It allowed us to have an adult relationship of a mother and son. And finally, at 51 years old, she was able to be the mother she always wanted to be to me. We were never best friends. I didn't want a best friend in my mother. But you know, I think what happened over time was that I'm going to school and I'm being bullied at school and I don't feel safe there, and I come home and I don't feel safe there, and what started happening was my home felt safer to me than the rest of the world, because I felt to some degree like I could go in the room, or I could just kind of ignore what was going on, or I was with my dad a lot too, which felt very safe to me. So, you know, there were times that I did feel safe, but by and large, I lived in fear. Well, what happened as I got older was that I continued, even in sobriety, to be in relationships, whether they be romantic relationships, friendships, or work relationships, where I feared the other person. I wouldn't stand up for myself. I wouldn't say things that I felt like needed to be said, because I was terrified of the repercussions. And that is what I grew up in, and that is a toxic relationship. When you don't feel like your value or your worth is equal to the other person in the relationship, you're in a toxic relationship, and you need to do something about it, fix it, stand up for yourself, or get the fuck out, honestly. Because when I look back on that, and you know, I dated somebody that was a horrific addict at one point, and I was kind of blind to it all. Like, I didn't even realize at the time that it was all going on, you know, around me, and it was just, and it was sad, you know. I look back on it, and it was prescription pills. And I look back on it, and I just kind of lived in this blind state of, you know, it wasn't crushing them and snorting them. It was doctor prescribed, but over abuse. And so in my head, as an addict in recovery, I justified it. How sick is that? You know? And I look at that, and it took me working with my sponsor at that time to realize I am not being healthy in this relationship. And I was thinking about that going into this meeting tonight, where I want to talk about toxicity and my being able to, or my willingness to enable other people's toxicity, and my being toxic in the relationship as well. And I cannot tell you how many people today, on the heels of me making that video yesterday, have said to me that they immediately downloaded Melody Beattie's Codependent No More on Kindle. Thank God, it will change your life like it changed mine. Because what will make you realize is you cannot control other people. You can only start taking care of yourself. In fact, I think that's kind of like the saying at the top of the book. And it's true, you know? And today I know that. But one of the things that really sucked a lot growing up and even way into my adult years, okay, with a lot of family members and a lot of friends, was that people always picked alcohol or drugs over me. I was always secondary to that. Now, they wouldn't say that. They wouldn't say, well, I love to drink. Like, my mom wouldn't look at me and say, I love to drink more than I love you. But we even had that conversation one time because I had a counselor say to me, is your mother willing to stop drinking for you? And I said, well, I mean, that's not a fair thing to say to her. And she said, to somebody that's not an alcoholic, that's a very fair statement. You are a person in recovery. If your mother is not an alcoholic, this should be no problem for her to not drink when you come over to her house. She should understand that's not safe for you in early recovery. And I said that to my mom, and she goes, surely you don't mean me. Those were her exact words. And I said, yes, I'm asking you to not drink, or I can't see you when I get out of treatment. And she said, are you really asking that of me? Like, you would have an issue if I went out to dinner. And she goes, of course I would do that. But I knew that she couldn't. And what that said to me was my mother's love, her addiction to alcohol, was more important at that moment than mine, because she wasn't willing. And I talked about this on the heels of this yesterday. You can't love somebody enough to want to get sober. That can be a motivating factor. Like, I love my child, therefore, like, I really want to do this for my child. But most people don't. Most people afterwards see that as a consequence that they're going to use. And later, much later, after my mom got sober, to me, she would say to me, I didn't even realize that I wasn't that present mother until after the fact, looking back, I realized how much I had affected you. And one of the reasons why I tell my mother's story on here, okay? Because it would be enough for me to get on here and tell my story. It would be, enough for me. And I did not see my mom for the first 6 months sober. I've talked about that on my vlog a lot. When she said to me, I cannot stop drinking, or, surely you don't mean me, or, okay, yes, but maybe we shouldn't all go out to dinner together because I'm going to want to have a glass of wine. When she started making all of these excuses, I was like, this is not a safe person for me to be around. I did not see my mother until my cousin's wedding that summer. And my mother at that point was 2 weeks sober. I did not see her, period, at all. Because my sobriety had to come first. I'd had enough people in my life that put drinking and things and their, need to use me, manipulate me first. That I, for one, and I had manipulated enough people that I had to take care of myself first. And that meant going to any lengths to stay clean and sober. And that meant changing my people, places, and things, even if that included my mother. And, over time, we had that conversation, and she was like, I just wasn't able to be the mother at that time because the drinking was so flooding my mind, and I didn't even realize it. So, like I said, I could get on video, and I could just tell my story. And I could talk about my recovery. I could never once mention my mother being sober. Not once. My mother was a person that liked change. She believed in change. She was a social activist, and she loved songs like Blowing in the Wind and The Times They Are Changing by Bob Dylan. And when my mother passed away, she died of a very, very rare disease called Wegener's vasculitis granulatosis. Not very many people get it. And it's not fatal for a lot of people because you usually catch it early, and they didn't catch it early with her. And when my mom died and my dad was talking to me about afterwards, he said, you need to get an autopsy. And I said, are you sure? Like, you really think that's something that mom would want? And he said, your mother is the person that would never want anybody else affected by what she went through if there was a way to stop it in the future. That's why I tell my mom's story. I want to offer you guys hope. To the mother out there or the father that may be watching my video and drinking and has a kid, it's not too late. To the child out there that thinks my parent will never stop drinking and I'm 40, it's never too late. I've seen 60 and 70-year-olds walk into the rooms of 12-step programs. I tell my mom's story to offer hope. I tell my story to offer hope to people out there that say, this is never possible for me. I cannot tell you how many countless counseling sessions, therapy sessions, family groups, family programs, on and on and on, fights with my mother that I looked at her. I cannot tell you how many bottles of alcohol I poured down the sink when I myself was drinking of my mother's, looking at her to make a point. I cannot tell you that book, Codependent No More, when it talks about buying a 6-pack of beer and feeding them to the person, I cannot tell you how much I behaved in that same way with my mother. And never, ever in a million years would ever have believed that I would be able to say that my mother got sober. And yet the last 13, almost 13 years of her life, we lived in sobriety together. Don't ever give up hope. It could happen for you. It might happen for you. But until that point, please take care of yourself. Just like I did, set the limits and the boundaries that you have to for you to get healthier. If you can't have that person in your life right now, just because they're family doesn't mean that you can't say to them, I can only see you on a limited status. We don't want to hurt people's feelings, but sometimes we are more willing to have our feelings hurt than the other person that's doing the most damage. Take care of yourself. Put yourself first. Be of value to yourself so you can be of value to somebody else. I hope I do good tonight on this speech. I'm so worried. I don't know what I'm going to say. Anyway, I wanted to share that with you guys because I don't talk about that often on here. I don't talk about why I do share my mom's story and my story because there's really three stories. There's my story, my mom's story, and our story together. And I think all three stories are important in offering hope to people out there that one day your story may change too. I love you, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.